Okay, guys. Come on, make some noise, please. Come on, just say something. Woo! Come on. Come on, you're happy to be here or not? Come on! I want people to come. So I want you to be enthusiastic. Come on, that was not enough. Come on, one more time. One more time. Thank you. See, you're a star already here.
No, the challenge is to see
I don't
if we
need
can
to
keep
do
the
any
energy
intro
up.
now. You can actually take the stage.
Awesome.
So rock it.
Hey, everybody. This is the first conference where I've ever spoken where people can actually pronounce my last name, so it's very exciting for me. So hi, I'm Jack. I am here from the Bay Area. I work for a company called Pandora, which you may or may not have heard of here. We're the largest internet radio company in the United States. We're also available in Australia and New Zealand. We've got about 250 million registered users. We're a public company, and we turned a profit for the first time last year, which was very, very exciting. And it's very exciting to me because in my role, I'm responsible for product management of revenue products there. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is really thinking about how to build a good product and how sort of advertising feeds into that. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of my experience of things that I've learned in my time at Pandora, but also some of the other products that I've worked on. I used to work at Google for a couple of years, helped launch the comparison ads product there, helped launch trailers in AdWords. I was the first product person on Google Plus Hangouts. I'm personally very happy that that's like the one feature that stood out of Google Plus that people continue to use. So proud of that. And I also worked at a company called StumbleUpon where we built up the ad product there. And so over the course of working on a lot of these products, I've really learned one key thing that I want to share with you guys, and it's in the world of building products of advertising. And one of the misconceptions that people make is that when you build ad products, you're building them for advertisers. And that couldn't be further from the truth of how you actually think about building products. You build ad products for users, and you have to really humanize what you're doing. And so this mantra that has really worked just across the board has been, what's good for users tends to be good for advertisers. And if you're ever thinking about building a monetized user experience, you have to be the utmost advocate for your users, what they do, why they're using your product. And it all sort of bleeds into this idea of all good ad products are good consumer products first, which leads to the question that I hope you're thinking, what makes a good consumer product? And that's what we'll spend most of our time talking about here. Thank you for asking that. I asked it on your behalf. So there's a framework that when I work with my team, we like to talk about really the 4 core things that you have to understand when you work as a product manager. So we hear a lot about contextualization, but context is just about the most important thing. When you think about building a product, context matters. And then that context leads into a trigger, and we'll talk about what each of these things mean. There's an activity that leads into, and then ultimately a reward. Why do you feel good about this? So what is the context? It's basically being aware of what's the current activity, location, or what's somebody thinking when they're thinking of using your product. So that's just sort of the meta 30,000-foot view. What am I thinking about? Then there's a trigger. There has to be that moment of inspiration. So I'm in this context, and something happened, and now I have to turn to your product. I turn to your product, and then I do something. What's that thing that I do? So of the 4 parts here, really interesting, the first 2 don't actually have anything to do with the product that you've built. It's about the surroundings of your product, what brought people into it. And then ultimately, what are the warm and fuzzy feelings that you generate when people actually conduct that activity on your service? So rather than just speak in the abstract, I'm going to give a couple of real-world examples. These are mostly US services. So if you're not aware of the services, bear with me. Hopefully some of them jump out. How many folks have heard of Snapchat? Use Snapchat? Oh, good. Oh, awesome. So what's the context for Snapchat? I want you to think about that. And as we go through this, as you go through the examples here with me, I want you to think about if you had to answer what's the context, what's the trigger, what's the activity, what's the reward in my service, and I'd actually be curious to hear your thoughts afterward of how your services apply. But Snapchat, what's the context? You know, I'm out with friends, I'm doing something fun. I think it has a bit of a context of feeling amorous sometimes, usually a party of one. And that leads into a trigger. This moment reminds me of somebody. So I'm in the zone, I'm experiencing something just happened and it made me think of you. So what do? I'm taken into the activity, I take a photo, I snap it, and I send it to somebody. And now I feel more connected with my friends, or potentially people I meet on another example that I'll talk about of Tinder. But that's one example, but it doesn't all have to be around the media space. Redfin is another company. I think they're only in the US. It's a real estate company where they focus on the context of, I'm really interested in buying a new home. And there's a trigger. I just recently bought a new home, and my trigger was my wife really wanted to buy a house. So that was my trigger. So I need to know what's available to purchase. And when I open Redfin, they have this really amazing feature, whereas a lot of real estate services just take you straight into a search bar. Redfin does a really amazing thing where they take me directly into the map. So I need to know what's available, but the way that we think about real estate is quite spatially. So these are the areas of San Francisco where we were looking for a house, and I was taken into that because Redfin did a pretty good job of trying to understand what's the context of what I'm looking for. Chances are, if I'm looking for a house, it's going to be somewhere around where I am right now. And then they do offer search capabilities, but it's kind of a secondary feature, and we'll talk about secondary features a little bit later on. And then what's the reward? I found 3 houses that I want to go check out. Going to an open house, talking to my realtor, etc. And then the next example I'll walk you through is the one that's closest to my heart, the one that I work on every single day, of Pandora. And so we think about what are the various contexts that, I'll talk about Pandora, but it's really that we engage in music. We listen to music while we go for a run. We also happen to listen to music in social settings. I heard American parties are very popular in Poland. Is that true? Okay. For weekends, okay. Well, it's Saturday. I look forward to being invited to your American party this weekend. And sometimes we listen to music at work. And we all just sort of get inspired by that context of, I'm about to start an endeavor. And so I'm starting, I need a companion. And so what do at Pandora? The number one most important feature that we've ever built at Pandora isn't anything other than when you open the app, it starts playing music. And that elimination of friction just brings you straight into that moment. It's understanding that context of, we understand you're not listening to music because your focus is to stare at the screen and just listen to the music that's playing and be wowed by the album art, while much of the album art that's out there is very visually appealing. We understand that the activity that we're providing is we're connecting you to music. And so the reward is, the music keeps me company. I feel like I have a companion for this. And so the final example that I'll use, I've never actually used Tinder, so if there are any users out there, maybe you can tell me where I'm right or wrong, but this is what I imagine. I'm feeling lonely, and in the school of giving presentations, they teach you that you need a picture of a puppy in every one of your presentations, and so I thought nothing better captured loneliness than this feeling right here. So when you're feeling like this puppy right here, you need some sort of a trigger of, I'm going to find someone for this weekend. And so that's your trigger. Your activity takes you straight into the rating screen. You find somebody here, in this case, Katara. Awesome. My reward is date set for this weekend. Excellent. So what's the common thread between all of these? What's that? Wife? Well, I guess that would be why I don't use Tinder. Well, I guess a little bit, yeah. The common thread is, it's like these things are very much about me. When you're building products, it's about creating that feeling of a one-to-one connection with the people that are using your service. And so it gets to this idea of, can you answer what the context of each of your individual users is when they come to use your service? And it's really important to understand that because, again, all good ad products are good consumer products first. And a good consumer product really only does one thing. And I'll explain that asterisk in a second. But I'm going to take a quick timeout out of the tech space and take you into your local supermarket. And the reason for that is there was a study that was done, it's going on about 20 years now, but it still applies, where we're often taught to think that the more options that you give to a consumer, the more likely it is that you'll find a fit for them. And what we found using empirical evidence is the more choices you give consumers, the more ideas of what your product could potentially be, is actually not true. It leads to lower sales. So there was an experiment that was conducted in supermarkets in California about 20 years ago with a variety of jams. And so there were two experiment groups. There was a sort of a setup where there were 24 jams set up in a grocery store. And then there was another setup where there were 6 jams set up in the grocery store. And what the researchers wanted to figure out was, can we actually increase the amount of sales of jam if we just show customers that they have more available to them? So part of the instinct was correct. So of the display that showed 24 jams, 60% of the people that walked by that jam display stopped by and sampled some jams, because we all know jam is delicious. Of the other group, where there were 6 on display, it wasn't as appealing to bring people into the door. So whereas the 24 group brought in 60% of people that walked by, the 6 group drove about 40%. Now, at the end of the day, getting people to sample your product is really interesting, but sales are what's actually important. And so what they found was, even though the 6 jams were better at, or were not as good at bringing as many people in the door, they were 10 times more effective at driving sales. So 3% of the people that stopped by the 24 jams actually bought the jam. 30% of the people that stopped by the 6 jams bought the jam. And this really applies into this idea of every good product doing one thing. If you've created a product that just basically does a variety of things, or you say, I want to give my customers as many options as possible to use my service, they might check it out, they might find it interesting, but ultimately what they learn is, I don't really know what your product does, and so I don't actually use it. And so having one key core feature of your product is really, really important. And really what you find is, no matter how many features you build, there's going to be one feature that drives the majority of your usage, so you've got to make it count. And so what's an example of this? An example, how many people use Twitter in the room here? Awesome. So we're all familiar with this screen. So I load Twitter, and what's the main user feature of Twitter? It's reading tweets. Every user that uses Twitter reads tweets. This is the main user experience, and this is where they built their ad product. There's a variety of secondary features where I get direct messages, I get @replies, I get hashtags. Those are secondary features. Those are only used by a small subset of the actual user base of Twitter. On Pandora, people listen to music, so we monetize the audio stream. We have a series of secondary features like our alarm clock, like the ability to add variety. Those are secondary features. Those drive engagement with our product, but they're not really the main way that we monetize. So knowing that every good product does one thing, you should think about when you're building your ad product, that's what you need to monetize. You need to monetize that core thing, that core reason why people come to your service. And so a lot of enthusiasm has been built, especially in the US, around this concept of native advertising. How many people have heard of native advertising? Seen it thrown around. All right, the buzzword will make its way here soon, I promise. But it's this idea of, whereas advertising may have been an interruptive experience in the past, we're now thinking of advertising in a way where we're allowing advertisers to pay for the right to become a part of the user experience. And so in the example of Facebook, when I go to Facebook, I don't just see banner ads everywhere, because Facebook knows that when I go to Facebook, I'm reading posts to catch up with the people that I know. And so Facebook, very intelligently, created the sponsored post. So I read posts. Posts can be advertisements. It integrates in with the user experience. It thinks users first. Why are my users here? I may be introducing them into something new. BuzzFeed is another one. I read stories that make me laugh. And so what does BuzzFeed do? They create stories on behalf of advertisers. Again, the Pandora example. I listen to audio. What's the best listening experience that we can create For our advertisers that responds back to our users, it's audio stations. So we work with companies like Bacardi to create listening experiences that are relatively unique, mixes with what our users do. And so when you think about advertising, and the reason I haven't spent that much time actually talking about advertising specifically is it really is just about having a full understanding of your user context, of the trigger, of that activity, and then ultimately the reward. Because the reward is what you're selling to your advertisers. Ultimately they want to drive some sort of connection. We kind of talk about our mission at Pandora of enabling brands and products to resonate with listeners when it comes to our ad product. Great advertising has this ability to leave that lasting image, memory, or emotion. And you can't do that if you just annoy the shit out of your users. You have to think about what's the activity that's going to actually generate a reward. And it all comes in this thought process of thinking of good ad products as being good consumer products. So that was the presentation portion of what I had prepared for you guys. I was made aware that I am the last speaker of the day, so I am what's between you and your alleged American parties for the weekend. But I am happy to stick around and answer any questions.
We'll do a proper Q&A. But first, yes,
cool.
Thank you. So I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so please raise your hands and a microphone will be provided to you. You know the drill now, you've been doing that for 2 days, right? Meanwhile, maybe a question from me in order to gain time. I agree, I really loved your presentation because I really agree about this, the sentiment that makes these ads feel more natural and less spammy. So what's your take on, and you might have mentioned it and I was not listening for 5 minutes, so sorry if you did.
It's okay,
but what's your take on Facebook videos that starts rolling immediately on ads? What is your take on Instagram feeding in, also video ads within the feed? Because they feel spammy. Or do you feel it's just because we're not used to it?
So what I think that they did that was really, really smart was they actually introduced the concept of the user experience of rolling videos first. So before an advertiser could actually have a video in a newsfeed, what they enabled was if I had kids and I had a video of my kid, they started auto streaming that. So you started training the user behavior to understand sometimes when you scroll through your news feed, you're going to see videos that scroll through. And it wasn't until about, I think, 6 months after they launched the consumer product that they launched the ad product. So they thought about what's the consumer experience? Will people watch video? And they learned that the answer was yes. And so they started doing the video ads.
Good enough.
Whether or not they work, that's, I think the jury's still out. But
yeah, it's still out. It's too soon to know. Yeah, I do agree with that statement. So who has a question? Please raise your hands. We are a bit behind the spotlight, so it's hard for us to actually watch the hands being risen. So please, come on. I know it's late.
We can talk about product. We can talk about. I also lead our corp dev for ad tech. So look at buying companies. Happy to answer any sorts of questions.
Thank you. Now, I know it's late, and I know it's day 2, but it's not every day you can have him on stage and asking questions, even though he will hang out. Please state your name and go ahead.
Okay, so Tomasz here. I have a question about when do you vision you should focus on thinking of monetization in terms of product development process, whether it should be before the first iteration or firstly you should get the product market fit in terms of a very specific feature, let's say, and then just move to monetization. What's your opinion on that?
So I think the user experience needs to be marinated before you start monetizing it. And so you can't build a monetization product until you can start to articulate what's my user experience. And so if my user experience is going to be changing quite regularly, the last thing that you want to do is get yourself locked into some sort of a monetization contract of I promised you this exclusive access for 6 months and now I can't actually iterate on my product. So it is a fine balance to move beyond, but I think that's part of the reason why raising venture money for especially consumer media companies is so important, because you start to build that trust with your users early on, and then as you start to get the scale with your user base, it starts to become more interesting of a buy.
See one question at the back, the very back. Thank you, Kuba.
Sexy horses. Almost. I have one question about the market. Is it possible to start with another chatting mobile application like Instagram or Snapchat, but something better? Do you think there is still place in this area?
If it fits a user need, I mean, if you can fit it into the context and trigger activity reward framework and identify something that those services don't, then I mean, I think it would be silly to say that there's never room for disruption. I mean, if you look back 5 years ago, the #1 photo sharing app among people below the age of 25 was Facebook. You look at it now and it's Instagram. And so 5 years ago, there was, the photo sharing thing was figured out, and then Instagram came along. I think the challenge that a lot of products that try to come into saturated spaces face are, this isn't coming from my Google Plus experience, but if you're just trying to make a product that's incrementally better than what exists today, consumers are going to continue to compare your service to that service, whereas what made Instagram so great relative to Facebook was there wasn't a symmetric sharing model, so I had an asymmetric model that was good. I could make my post private, I could make my post public. That was a level of control that was, I think, confusing on Facebook at the time. And so they found a way to really capture the context of sharing photos to be slightly more ephemeral than what Facebook is. Facebook was very much me and my friends, and Instagram started as being artsy, and now it's back to being ephemeral photos with my friends. But it really just goes back to understanding the context and trigger.
One can even argue nowadays the biggest photo sharing app could be WhatsApp.
Or Snapchat too.
And WhatsApp, but they're not.
Yeah.
Any other question? We still have a few minutes. I'm seeing hands over there, but I'm not quite sure actually. Thank you.
Hey. Thanks. Looking at native advertising from the other perspective, the advertiser's perspective, do you know of any, I guess, frameworks, ways of thinking about this? Like, what I'm talking about is ad and product fit, maybe.
Yeah, so do advertisers actually want to buy the native ad product that you've built?
Yeah.
I think that's certainly a challenge that we face. Ultimately, advertising, in a lot of cases, they want to prove ROI. So if you can show that by paying me X amount, I delivered Y results, the mechanism in which you do it starts becoming not as important. But it's really challenging to say that this exposure to this ad led to this sort of sale in the real world. And so what you constantly need to do is think about how you frame your product into the standard language of advertisers. So most ad products are still evaluated on two things, which is reach and frequency. Reach being how many people actually saw that ad, and frequency being how many times did they see it. And the reason that frequency is so important is it tends to draw memory retention. So the way that our brains work in terms of retention, we basically forget things on a logarithmic scale. If we see something on day 1, the chances that we remember it on day 2 are really low. If I see something on day 1, day 2, and day 3, my chances of retaining it are now significantly higher. And so that's why reach and frequency have always been important in advertising. And if you can just kind of show that maybe with fewer frequency, you can continue to drive that retention, that people remember seeing that ad, respond positively, then you really solve the need for advertisers.
Well, on that, I think I will close that because people want. Oh, you want to ask a question? Okay, I'll allow that one last one. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi. I've got a question in regards to putting ads on your website. Like in terms of like companies that do news, etc., and ads are the mainstream of revenue. It's basically acceptable that they do it, right? But if you have a website and it's a portal about something completely different, it's your business. Would you say that to a certain extent you should try to avoid putting ads in order to generate more revenue, in order not to distract the customer, or as long as it's not like a pop-up to the whole website, just small, that it's still acceptable and it wouldn't distract the customer and put off from the main product?
Yeah, so it gets back to that idea of every good product does one thing. And so the way that you want to monetize it may not necessarily be advertising. So if you think through what are the reasons why people are coming to my service and what are the sort of core atomic units of their consumption, advertising works best when it aligns with that atomic unit. I think the way that banner ads grew, there was a really strange friction between the three parties that are involved in advertising. There's the advertiser, the publisher, and the user. The user comes to the site to the publisher to presumably consume content, be it read articles, watch videos, whatever it might be. And then the publisher was making a trade-off with the advertiser saying, I'm actually going to sacrifice the amount of time that people spend on my site so that my users can go to some sort of click action. And what we found was over time, click-through rates on those ads have dropped fairly precipitously because users that come to a site go to that site because they want to stay there. And that's where you've seen the native advertising integration become very important. You've now aligned the incentives of user wants to stay at publisher, publisher wants user to stay at publisher, advertiser wants to be happy, publisher is now happy that advertiser has found a way to integrate into a way where somebody can continue to stay on my site.
Thank you.
Thank you, that please give me a round of applause.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Jack.